Hey guys, tonight we're creeping into the shadowy corridors of the Persian mountains, where almond pastries aren't just dessert. They're deadly secrets, waiting to slip through your fingers like fine ground sugar. You stand beneath the smoky silhouette of Alamut's cliffs, wind tugging at your robes, the scent of roasted nuts and resin drifting from hidden kitchens. The torches flicker along stone walls carved into impossible heights, and you can almost taste the sweet, nutty paste laced with 1,000 secrets. You're probably picturing delicate desserts dusted with powdered sugar. But let's be real. If you were actually here, you probably wouldn't survive this. Between the dizzying mountain paths, the paranoid assassins lurking around every corner, and the chance your dessert might double as a coded death warrant, you'd be toast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop me a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing how many time zones are joining me for these sleepy adventures. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the winding passages of Alamut, feeling the chill stone beneath your palms. The fortress, perched like a hawk over the plains below, is home to the legendary Hashashin, whose very name has rippled through centuries, tangled up with myths of shadowy murders and whispered political chaos. But tonight, your curiosity isn't about daggers, it's about pastries. Because believe it or not, those same feared assassins once carried messages hidden inside almond sweets. In the back kitchens, enormous clay ovens glow red, while rows of cooks pound almonds into a shimmering white paste. The rhythm echoes off the rock walls, as if the mountains themselves are drumming secrets into the night. Historians agree that almond paste was a staple of Persian sweets, prized for both its taste and its pliability, perfect for hiding thin scraps of parchment. But there's a quirkier angle, too. Some fringe historians claim the kitchens of Alamut were like early intelligence hubs, staffed by culinary artisans who doubled as cryptographers. You can almost see one cook leaning over the mortar, whispering, "Don't oversalt the paste, or you'll reveal the code." Though historians still argue whether the Hashashin really employed full-time pastry spies or simply trusted a tight-knit kitchen crew. As you edge closer to the counters, your nose twitches at warm almond fragrance, undercut by a sharp tang of vinegar used to clean the knives. Huge copper pots bubble with sugar syrup, the steam swirling into intricate patterns that feel almost like calligraphy in the air. The sweetsmiths wear simple tunics, their forearms dusted in flour, moving quickly, yet glancing over their shoulders as though even the walls have ears. One mainstream fact most people don't realize: the Hashashin's fortress wasn't just military. Alamut housed scholars, scientists, and poets alongside assassins. Knowledge was power, and knowledge moved quietly, sometimes in sugar and nuts instead of scrolls and swords. But here's the cheeky twist that nobody told you in history class. While the Hashashin were famous for political killings, they also had a sweet tooth. Pastries weren't just for morale. They became covert carriers for fragile messages. And it wasn't always about political schemes. Sometimes the pastry carried simple instructions like troop movements, lists of safe houses, or even recipes for medicinal concoctions. It's almost quaint, thinking of ruthless killers fussing over how much ground cardamom to sprinkle on top. Historians still argue whether the sheer complexity of the Hashashin's communication network was exaggerated by later chroniclers. Some insist the whole pastry message business might have been a brilliant rumor to keep enemies paranoid. Because if your foes think any dessert could spell their doom, that's psychological warfare on a silver platter. Yet, there's one tiny historical tidbit that's too charming to leave out. Some believe the Hashashin's almond paste was sometimes flavored with orange blossom water, which wasn't just tasty. It helped cover up the faint scent of ink seeping through thin pastry layers. Imagine leaning in for a sniff, only to get a whiff of floral sweetness rather than suspicious chemicals. Your sandals scuff across flour-dusted stones as you peer into a wicker basket heaped with pastries. The shapes vary, some round, some twisted into spirals, each potentially hiding secrets that could topple empires. One cook glances at you and cracks a grin. "Careful, traveler," he murmurs. "One bite, and you might become part of a very different story." And you can't help but chuckle. Because while the idea of killer pastries sounds like pure spy fiction, it's not entirely impossible. In a world where knowledge traveled slowly and enemies were everywhere, even almond sweets could become silent weapons. So as you stand in the glow of the clay ovens, remember this. The next time you're eyeing that innocent-looking marzipan at your local bakery, you might want to check for hidden parchment, or at least ask if the baker moonlights as an assassin. You step deeper into the fortress kitchens, and the heat presses in around you like a wool cloak. Copper pots clang against the stone counters as cooks work fast, scraping sticky mixtures off wooden paddles. Tonight, your eyes are fixed on a particular bowl where pale almond paste glistens under torchlight. But something else catches your nose. A sharp, piney tang threads through the sweet aroma, tickling your senses like a walk through a resin-dripping forest. See, your average pastry chef might be content with almonds, sugar, and a splash of floral water. But the Hashashin weren't your average pastry chefs. These guys added pine resin to their almond paste, transforming innocent desserts into secret communication tools. The resin's sticky nature meant it could double as an adhesive, sealing tiny scraps of parchment between pastry layers. And if the message needed to be read without breaking the treat, a careful warm touch would soften the resin just enough to peel it open without destroying the pastry. Talk about practical and delicious spycraft. Historians agree that pine resin was widely used in medieval times, not only in food, but as a sealant, varnish, and even medicine. But historians still argue whether pine resin was the best choice for covert baking. Some say it left a faint taste that might have tipped off a suspicious eater. Others claim its bitterness blended so well with the almonds that no one would suspect a thing. You lean closer, peering into the sticky paste as a cook folds it like satin ribbons. Each turn of the paddle creates layers where resin can be hidden, so thin you'd think you're staring at phyllo dough. Meanwhile, the resin glows faintly amber in the firelight, like tiny frozen suns trapped in sugar. And here's a fringe tidbit that might make you raise an eyebrow. There's speculation among a few culinary historians that the Hashashin sometimes added pine resin for its supposed purifying properties, believing it kept their messages safe from magical curses or evil spirits. Imagine that. A bunch of deadly assassins worrying about mystical hexes and baking protective charms into their desserts. You half expect someone to pull out a crystal and wave it over the pastry for good measure. A burly chef slams a new bowl onto the counter, grumbling about how the resin always clings to his fingers. He wipes his hands on a scrap of linen that, suspiciously, might just be an old encoded message repurposed as a rag. And as he mutters under his breath, you pick up a few words that sound a lot like passwords. Or maybe he's just complaining about the price of almonds. It's hard to tell in this place. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked. Pine resin wasn't merely a kitchen trick. Throughout the Middle Ages, it was used to seal barrels, waterproof ships, and treat wounds. So the Hashashin, ever practical, simply adapted a familiar material to suit their espionage needs. Nothing went to waste in Alamut. Yet the debate rages on. Historians still argue whether the Hashashin truly favored pine resin for culinary espionage, or if the entire tale grew larger in the retelling. Some insist the resin was simply for flavor or texture, and the notion of sealing secrets inside pastries might be delicious myth-making. But honestly, who wouldn't want to believe in a pastry that might carry a deadly secret instead of just a few chopped pistachios? You shift your weight, careful not to knock over a steaming tray of pastries. One cook winks at you and whispers, "Just enough resin to seal the truth, but not enough to stick your jaw shut." It's the kind of wry humor you'd expect from someone who knows a single misstep could mean disaster. And while pine resin might seem like a minor detail, remember this. In a world where messages traveled slowly, anything that protected fragile parchment was worth experimenting with, even if it meant chewing a dessert that tasted faintly of Christmas trees. So next time you're at the market and you see pine resin on a shelf, you'll know it's not just for incense burners or medieval bandages. Somewhere in those glistening golden drops lies a centuries-old secret of espionage, and maybe a recipe for the world's stickiest almond pastry. Your fingers hover just above the marble counter, dusted in flour and faint traces of sticky resin. You're leaning in closer now, eyes squinting as the head pastry chef deftly spreads almond paste over a broad, flat slab. The paste glows pale under torchlight, smooth as silk. And then, there it is, a delicate flick of a calligraphy brush, gliding across the paste's surface in loops and swirls so fine you'd think it was a henna tattoo for a dessert. Because this is where the real magic happens. Tiny Arabic script hidden between sweet almond layers. The Hashashin weren't merely slipping whole sheets of parchment into pastries. Sometimes they wrote directly onto thin films of almond paste itself, or onto paper as fine as onion skin, layered carefully so the writing lay invisible until someone peeled the dessert apart. Historians agree that Arabic calligraphy, especially Naskh or Kufic scripts, was prized for clarity even at small sizes. Skilled scribes could fit entire messages in a space smaller than your fingernail. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin used edible inks exclusively, or if sometimes they risked non-edible dyes for sharper lines, hoping the sweet scent of almonds would disguise any chemical whiff. You catch the scent drifting your way, a mix of almonds and something floral, subtle and mysterious. That's the quirky bit. Some fringe researchers believe the ink used for these secret writings was mixed with rosewater. Not just because rosewater was delicious, though it absolutely is, but because its potent scent masked the faint metallic smell of iron gall ink. Imagine leaning in to take a bite, only to be charmed by the delicate perfume of roses instead of realizing you're chewing state secrets. The pastry chef pauses, dips the brush again, and glances over his shoulder as if even the oven might be eavesdropping. His brush leaves tiny curls of script behind, messages like, "Meet at the bazaar fountain at dusk," or "Trust no one wearing the red sash." Ordinary words that, in the wrong ears, could ignite wars. One mainstream fact folks often miss: medieval inks weren't all the same. Some were plant-based and edible, made from things like pomegranate skins or saffron, while others were loaded with iron compounds or carbon soot. Definitely not something you'd want in your dessert. The Hashashin walked a delicate line between secrecy and safety, trying to ensure their sweets didn't poison the intended recipient, or worse, clue them in that there was a secret inside. Yet historians still argue whether these pastry-born notes were commonplace or reserved only for the most crucial dispatches. Some claim the risk of discovery was too high. Others insist the brilliance of hiding messages in food outweighed the dangers. It's the kind of debate that makes you wish someone had left behind a cookbook titled The Assassin's Guide to Edible Espionage. Meanwhile, the chef here works with astonishing speed. You blink, and an entire line of Arabic text has vanished beneath another sweep of almond paste. The surface looks perfectly innocent again, a smooth, sweet blank slate. You'd never suspect the secret's layered just a millimeter beneath the surface. One cook leans in, whispers to you, "If you read the almond paste wrong way round, it says, 'I'm watching you.'" Then he cackles, brushing crumbs from his tunic, and you can't help laughing. It's just the kind of gallows humor you'd expect in a fortress of people who live by secrecy and subtlety. Here's another quirky tidbit. There's speculation that certain spice blends were chosen not for taste, but to gently obscure faint smudges left by ink or the faint impressions of writing. Nutmeg, cardamom, even a hint of black pepper, all masking agents in a deadly dessert. It's practically an ancient version of using invisible ink and lemon juice, except tastier. Your eyes flick to a stack of paper so thin it's almost translucent. The cook demonstrates how it folds effortlessly into the pastry, nearly invisible once wrapped inside the almond paste. He chuckles and says, "Better than hiding a dagger." And you realize that in the world of the Hashashin, sometimes a few written words were sharper than any blade. So next time you're tearing into that flaky almond croissant, remember, beneath those sweet layers, history once hid secrets capable of toppling empires. And if you catch the faint scent of roses, well, maybe check for hidden messages before you take another bite. You blink against the kitchen's smoky heat and step back into the fortress corridors, where the air grows cool and dry, carrying the faint echoes of chanting voices. Ahead of you, two figures shuffle past, hoods pulled low, robes the color of coarse linen, their sandals slapping softly against the stone. They vanish around a bend, carrying something wrapped in linen, and you can't help but follow. Because here's where the Hashashin's pastry secrets get legs: couriers in monastic robes. These weren't your run-of-the-mill monks content to sip herbal tea and illuminate manuscripts. No, these messengers were specialists, trained to vanish into the dusty trade routes that crisscrossed Persia, Syria, and beyond. Historians agree that disguise was one of the Hashashin's favorite tools. Pilgrims, merchants, scholars, even beggars. Any identity was fair game. But historians still argue whether monks were the most frequent cover for these covert pastry couriers. Some say the robes offered ideal camouflage, blending seamlessly with traveling holy men who were rarely searched too closely. Others suggest the Hashashin preferred merchant disguises, letting them wander the bazaars without drawing suspicion. As you trail your mysterious monks, you catch a glimpse of a linen bundle. It's not very big, easily mistaken for a bundle of herbs or a holy relic, but if you sniffed closer, you'd detect the sweet perfume of almonds and rosewater wafting from inside. Here's a quirky tidbit you'll love. Some fringe scholars insist that at least one sect of these covert couriers posed as wandering dervishes, spinning wildly in dusty courtyards as a performance, distracting onlookers while another courier slipped off into the crowd carrying almond-filled secrets. Imagine whirling around in circles as your buddy sneaks off with the pastry version of a nuclear launch code. Now that's teamwork. The desert roads these monks traveled were no gentle stroll. Bandits lurked behind dunes. Desert heat scorched your throat until your tongue felt like old parchment. And the constant threat loomed that the Sultan's spies might stop you and pry open your pastry for hidden parchment. It's enough to make you swear off sweets altogether. One mainstream fact, often overlooked, is that the Hashashin's reach extended deep into trade networks that stitched the medieval Islamic world together. Silk from China, spices from India, Venetian glass. The same caravans that carried precious goods also carried whispers of power. A disguised courier could slip among the traders, their almond pastries hidden in packs of dried fruits and nuts, crossing borders with astonishing ease. Yet historians still argue whether the almond pastry couriers were widespread or reserved for only the highest stakes missions. Some believe it was far too risky to send messages this way, that the Hashashin's reputation alone was enough to maintain fear and control without needing elaborate pastry deliveries. Others insist the pastry network was the backbone of their intelligence machine. One of your monkish guides slips into a crowded roadside caravanserai. You follow, nose twitching at the mingled scents of roasted lamb, incense, and, you guessed it, almond pastries. Inside, travelers squat around low tables, sipping hot tea and murmuring in a dozen languages. It's the perfect place for a discreet handoff. A messenger sidles up to a trader, slipping a small pastry into his palm with barely a nod. The trader tucks it into his sash, the transaction invisible to anyone not watching for it. Meanwhile, a local storyteller bellows out a ridiculous tale about a goat that joined the Sultan's court. You're left trying not to giggle while spying on medieval espionage. And here's another fringe detail to tickle your imagination. There's talk among some historians that certain pastries were marked with tiny intentional imperfections, a slightly crooked swirl of almond paste, or a small dent. These tiny signs served as codes themselves, signaling who was safe to trust or which message was genuine. A pastry, in other words, could be both message and password. As you stand watching the bustling crowd, you realize something. In the world of the Hashashin, even the quietest spaces, the monastery halls, the flicker of incense smoke, the soft chant of prayers, were battlegrounds of information. And that's the brilliance of it. No one ever suspects the monks or the pastries. So next time you're in a cafe and see a quiet man in a robe nibbling a sweet treat, don't panic. But maybe glance twice at his croissant, just in case. You leave the busy caravanserai behind, slipping once more into the fortress shadows, where the stone corridors seem to lean in around you. The scent of roasted almonds still clings to your cloak as you follow a narrow passage leading toward the testing chamber. the place where even the Hashashin's sweet secrets weren't trusted without a taste test. Because here's the thing. For all the delicacy and artistry of these almond pastries, the Hashashin lived in a world steeped in paranoia. So, before any pastry went on its clandestine journey, someone had to nibble it first. Tasting poison for peace of mind was as essential to their espionage as sharpened daggers. Historians agree that political poisoning was a constant threat in medieval courts. Whether in wine, honey, or pastries, poison offered a silent, near-perfect weapon. But historians still argue how often these Hashashin tasters actually fell victim to deadly doses. Some insist poisonings were rare, and the reputation alone kept enemies fearful. Others argue that the price of secrecy was paid in human lives, even if only a few unfortunate bites at a time. You duck your head through a low archway and find yourself in a chamber glowing with soft lamplight. A stone table stands in the center, scattered with half-eaten pastries, small knives, and tiny clay bowls of herbal antidotes. The air smells of sugar, vinegar, and something metallic. You're not sure whether your stomach's rumbling with hunger or pure dread. Here's the quirky detail that adds a pinch of grim humor to this scene. Some fringe historians suggest the Hashashin employed designated pastry testers whose entire job was to eat suspect desserts. They were rumored to be chosen not only for bravery, but for a naturally high tolerance for toxins, an ancient version of human guinea pigs. One legend even claims there was a man nicknamed Iron Belly, famed for once surviving a pastry laced with a dose of arsenic strong enough to kill a mule. Imagine putting that on your resume. A thin, hooded man steps forward, picks up a delicate almond crescent, and carefully bites into it. You watch the muscle twitch in his jaw as he chews slowly, eyes narrowing in concentration. A hush settles over the chamber. Seconds tick by like an eternity. Finally, he swallows and gives a small, satisfied nod. No one cheers, of course. That would be unprofessional. But a quiet sigh of relief whispers around the room. One mainstream fact that often goes overlooked is the surprisingly advanced knowledge medieval people had of antidotes. Even in the 12th century, healers knew certain herbs and compounds could counteract poisons. Garlic, vinegar, charcoal, all were used in attempts to purge toxins from the body. So these testers weren't entirely helpless. They often had a stash of counteragents close at hand. Yet historians still argue whether the Hashashin truly had a systematic method for detecting poisons in pastries, or whether they relied entirely on human testers risking their lives for every message. Some scholars propose that a few primitive chemical tests existed, involving silver needles dipped into food to detect arsenic, but evidence remains hazy. The tester wipes his lips and reaches for a clay bowl of dark liquid, swirling it before taking a cautious sip. It's some bitter concoction of herbs and vinegar, presumably meant to neutralize any lingering toxins. He grimaces and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Could have used more honey." You can't help but stifle a laugh. Even in the deadliest corners of espionage, there's always someone complaining about the taste. And here's another fringe rumor that might make you blink. It's whispered that some Hashashin tasters were rewarded handsomely for their service, given extra rations, silk garments, or even safe retirement if they survived long enough. But just as often, they simply disappeared. because knowing which pastries were poisoned was its own kind of dangerous secret. The cook takes the tested pastry and carefully places it in a wicker basket, ready for its journey into the wider world. A delicate spiral of almond paste glistens atop its surface, hiding the deadly possibility that was just neutralized, or perhaps never existed at all. So the next time you're savoring a pastry and someone offers you a taste just to check if it's safe, you might want to pause. Because in the Hashashin's world, the most delicious bite could be your last, and someone else's insurance policy. You slip back into the fortress corridors, following the winding passages that seem to breathe with secrets. The sharp scent of vinegar fades behind you, replaced by the warm perfume of honey wafting from a nearby chamber. Your curiosity pulls you closer until you step into a room where sunlight slants through arrow-slit windows, catching droplets of golden syrup as they drizzle slowly into wide copper bowls. Because tonight's tale takes a sweet detour. Honey as a spy tool. You watch as a cook, sleeves rolled high, stirs a bubbling pot where almond pastries bathe in sticky amber glaze. But this isn't just dessert topping. Historians agree that honey, prized across the medieval world for its sweetness and preservation powers, played a crucial role in keeping those hidden messages safe. A thin glaze of honey could seal delicate papers inside pastry layers, protecting them from moisture, mold, and desert heat during long journeys. But historians still argue whether honey was chosen primarily for its preserving qualities or because it helped disguise faint chemical odors from ink or pine resin. Some insist it was all about longevity. Others say the Hashashin simply had sweet teeth and liked an excuse for an extra glaze. You lean closer, mesmerized by the way the syrup catches the light like liquid jewels. A spoonful of it drips onto the stone counter, forming a tiny, glistening pool. And here's the quirky tidbit that makes this room feel straight out of a medieval fantasy novel. There's a fringe theory that certain Hashashin kitchens trained bees to recognize specific scents associated with enemy spies. According to this idea, bees could be released near strangers, and if the insects gathered suspiciously around a man's garments, it meant he'd been handling the wrong kinds of spices, or worse, poison. Now, historians largely roll their eyes at this claim, because let's face it, it sounds like something from a bad spy comedy. But you have to admit, the image of assassin beekeepers commanding a squadron of buzzing insect detectives is just too delicious to ignore. You glance around the room as cooks brush honey over rows of pastries cooling on wooden racks. Each piece shines with a glossy finish, almost daring you to taste it. The honey not only locks in flavor and moisture, but also acts as a thin adhesive layer, holding the folded edges of almond paste firmly together. You'd have to know exactly where to look and how to peel carefully to reveal the secrets hidden inside. One mainstream fact many forget is that honey was so valuable in medieval times, it often served as a form of currency. It was used to pay taxes, settle debts, and even bribe officials. So for the Hashashin, honey wasn't just an ingredient. It was part of the fortress's strategic stockpile, as critical to their operations as swords and arrows. Yet historians still argue whether the Hashashin's use of honey was a clever espionage technique, or simply a culinary flourish. Some suggest the sweet glaze was enough to make even wary sultans accept a gift pastry without suspicion. After all, who'd believe a treat dripping with golden syrup could hide deadly secrets? You notice a young apprentice carefully measuring honey into small ceramic pots, muttering calculations under his breath. He's counting how many spoonfuls are needed per pastry, part chemistry, part ritual. He looks up at you, shrugs, and says, "Better too sweet than too suspicious." And you nearly choke on a laugh. Here's another delightful twist. In some cases, the Hashashin reportedly used different types of honey, each carrying subtle variations in color and aroma, as a code itself. Pale honey might signal safe passage, while darker forest honey meant danger lay ahead. Imagine decoding your fate based on how floral or smoky your dessert tasted. A cook glances at you over his shoulder, waving a honey-dipped brush. "Just remember," he says, "the thicker the glaze, the deeper the secret." So the next time you drizzle honey over your toast or stir it into your tea, give a nod to those medieval kitchens of Alamut. Because in the right hands, even the simplest sweetness could become a veil for conspiracies, and a silent courier for secrets meant to change the world. You turn away from the glistening honey jars, wiping a sticky fingertip against your robe, and wander back toward the heart of the kitchens. The noise grows louder, punctuated by the thump of rolling pins and the rhythmic slam of dough against marble. All around you, cooks sculpt almond paste into intricate shapes, spirals, crescents, tiny braids that look like edible jewelry. But here's where things get especially clever. Because in the world of the Hashashin, even pastry shapes could be passwords. Historians agree that medieval cultures placed meaning in food shapes. From braided breads signaling religious holidays to shaped sweets denoting royal gifts, nothing was purely decorative. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin used specific pastry designs as covert signals for safe passage or secret affiliations. Some scholars think the story has been wildly exaggerated. Others insist that for a group obsessed with secrecy, edible code symbols were practically inevitable. You lean over a marble table where a wiry pastry chef coils almond paste into perfect spirals. Each pastry seems identical, but then he subtly alters the direction of the swirl on a few of them, curling left instead of right. It's barely noticeable unless you're watching. He winks at you and murmurs, "Spiral left, you're safe. Spiral right, run." And that's the quirky tidbit for you. Some fringe researchers believe these swirl directions functioned as literal passcodes. A courier entering a safe house might carry pastries with spirals turning one way to signal loyalty, while the opposite swirl meant danger, or even a trap. It's like a medieval version of flashing your headlights twice to warn of a speed trap, except you're doing it with dessert. Another chef glides past you, his hands moving so quickly he seems to conjure shapes from thin air. He molds little almond crescents, then presses tiny dots into their surfaces with a metal rod. 3 dots mean one thing. 2 mean something else. It's all very hush-hush. One mainstream fact that often goes unnoticed. Symbolic food shapes were not unique to the Hashashin. Across the medieval Islamic world, certain sweet shapes signaled religious feasts, political allegiances, or family traditions. What's unique is the notion of those shapes carrying military secrets. Yet historians still argue whether croissant-like spirals actually appeared among the Hashashin's repertoire. Some claim the iconic crescent shapes later attributed to Ottoman bakers have been projected backward onto the Hashashin era without evidence. Others argue that spirals and crescents were common across many cultures, making them perfect for hidden codes precisely because no one would question them. A short man with a big beard flips a tray of pastries onto a woven mat. He squints at you and says, "Don't eat the star shapes unless you're willing to start a war." You chuckle, but he doesn't smile back. Either he's joking, or that's classified information. Here's another quirky angle. Fringe historians whisper that certain pastries weren't meant to be eaten at all. Instead, they were passed from hand to hand as tokens, their untouched state proof that the message inside remained unread. If someone tried to nibble the evidence, it was a clear sign the code had been compromised. Imagine having to guard a dessert for days, praying nobody got hungry enough to take a bite. You step back as a long wooden paddle slides into the clay oven. The heat bursts out in a wave that leaves your cheeks glowing. And as the door swings shut, you wonder how many pastries in there hold swirling secrets waiting to be carried across kingdoms. So, next time you're at the bakery, staring at the rows of intricately shaped sweets, maybe pause and ask yourself, which way do the spirals turn? And what secrets might they be hiding? You step away from the oven's blast of heat, your cheeks still flushed, and drift along a quieter hallway. A cool breeze drifts in through narrow slits in the fortress wall, carrying hints of almonds. But this time mixed with something sharper, almost medicinal. It pricks at your senses, tickling the back of your throat with a faint bitterness that makes you swallow hard. Because tonight's secrets swirl around one of the most dangerous scents in medieval kitchens: bitter almond. You pause outside a side chamber where a cook is grinding almond kernels in a heavy brass mortar. The rhythmic pounding echoes like distant drums, but the smell rising from the bowl is intense, far sharper than the gentle sweetness you'd expect. And that's because bitter almonds contain compounds that can produce cyanide when improperly handled, a fact that gave these little nuts a terrifying double life, as both delicacy and potential poison. Historians agree that bitter almonds were used in medieval times for flavoring, though only in tiny amounts. When carefully prepared, they added a rich, marzipan-like taste. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin deliberately harnessed bitter almonds for intimidation, slipping just enough into pastries to send a silent message of lethal possibility. Some scholars insist that was part of their psychological warfare, while others dismiss it as folklore layered over centuries of fear. A tall chef with sun-browned skin leans over his mortar, wiping sweat from his forehead. He glances at you and mutters, "Too much bitter almond," and your pastry becomes a confession. He's not entirely joking. One rumor among the fortress's kitchens claims a single slip of the pestle, an extra kernel ground into the paste, could be all it took to turn a secret message into a silent weapon. Here's the quirky tidbit for tonight. Some fringe historians believe that the faint scent of bitter almonds might have been used as a secret code itself. Imagine a courier arriving in a distant city, passing a pastry to a contact who takes one sniff and knows instantly that danger, or betrayal, is afoot. It's like a medieval version of wearing a certain color tie to a covert meeting. One mainstream fact most people overlook is that cyanide wasn't purely a weapon in medieval times. Tiny doses of bitter almond extract were sometimes used medicinally, prescribed by physicians for ailments ranging from coughs to stomach complaints. The line between cure and killer was terrifyingly thin. Yet historians still argue whether the Hashashin ever risked slipping cyanide-laced almond paste into their actual coated pastries. Some say it was far too dangerous to risk losing crucial messages or trusted couriers to accidental poisoning. Others insist that keeping enemies on edge, forever wondering whether the next bite might be their last, was part of the Hashashin's reputation as master manipulators. You watch as the chef spoons out a portion of ground almonds into a shallow bowl. He adds a sprinkle of sugar, then pauses to sniff the mixture cautiously. His eyes narrow, and he gives a tiny nod. "Safe," he whispers, though the tension in his shoulders says otherwise. Another cook, humming under his breath, slides a tray closer. He pipes almond paste into neat lines across the pastry's surface, then leans close to murmur, "A single whiff of bitter almond can change an entire negotiation." You blink, realizing how quickly food transforms into a weapon and a message in these fortress kitchens. Here's another fringe curiosity. Some legends say that the mere rumor of bitter almond poisoning was sometimes enough to cause political chaos. Sultans and emirs reportedly refused pastries outright if they suspected the Hashashin might be involved. It's a grimly effective tool, wielding fear instead of blades. The chef finishes folding his pastries, pressing edges together so gently you'd think he was crafting fine origami. He glances at you and smirks. If you can't taste the difference, pray you've chosen your friends wisely. So next time you're enjoying marzipan or almond cookies and you catch a fleeting bitter scent, pause for a second. Because in the world of the Hashashin, even a single whiff could be the difference between loyalty and lethal consequences. You leave the almond chamber behind, your nostrils still tingling from the faint bitterness, and step into a corridor echoing with muffled laughter and clinking cups. The fortress walls might be thick and secretive, but even here, news leaks like syrup from a cracked pastry shell. And nowhere does gossip bubble faster than in the taverns clustered around the foothills of Alamut. Tonight, you wander into one such tavern. The door creaks open, spilling golden lamplight across dusty tiles. Inside, men in robes and merchants' tunics crowd low wooden tables. Platters of roasted lamb and bowls of dates sit between towering flagons of sweet wine and small pyramids of, yes, almond pastries. Because even spies have to eat. Historians agree that taverns and caravanserais were vital hubs of medieval intelligence. Travelers traded news for drinks, merchants swapped secrets over steaming stew, and whispers often carried further than any official decree. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin's pastry secrets ever slipped into these public spaces, or whether the entire almond code remained locked away inside fortress walls. You edge closer to a table where two men lean in, voices low. One sports a silver ring engraved with a hawk. The other flicks pastry crumbs from his dark beard as he mutters, "I heard the assassins bake messages right into almond sweets." His companion scoffs, but his eyes dart nervously toward the kitchen door. Because even a rumor about the Hashashin was enough to twist your stomach into knots. Here's the quirky tidbit that makes this scene irresistible. Some fringe historians claim rival factions tried to steal the Hashashin's pastry recipes, hoping to decipher the codes, or simply to poison their own enemies using identical treats. There's a half-legend floating around that a rival sect tried to replicate the pastries, but accidentally produced almond bricks so hard they cracked a vizier's tooth. not quite the elegant espionage they'd envisioned. One mainstream fact often overlooked is how much power culinary knowledge held in medieval times. Spices, recipes, and preparation techniques weren't just luxuries, they were fiercely guarded secrets. Knowing a rival's trade routes for saffron or where they sourced the purest almonds could be as valuable as military intelligence. Yet historians still argue whether these tavern rumors ever held substance. Some insist the Hashashin's methods were so tightly controlled that no outsider truly knew the recipes or codes. Others point out that people talk, and a single drunk kitchen apprentice could spill secrets over a jug of mulberry wine. Nearby, a plump innkeeper bustles past carrying a tray of pastries dusted in powdered sugar. He pauses at your table, grinning. "Care for a sweet?" he asks. "Though if it's from Alamut, better check for hidden scrolls, eh?" He laughs, but his eyes flicker with genuine caution. Because in this world, jokes about poisoned pastries always hover between comedy and genuine terror. One man at the table slams his cup down and growls, "I tell you, I heard the assassins use pine resin to seal their secrets. Or was it honey? Bah, who can keep it straight?" His friend just shakes his head and mutters something about almond prices skyrocketing thanks to rumors of secret messages hidden inside. Here's another fringe angle. Some believe that certain flavors in the pastries might have been subtle signals, even in public settings like taverns. A stronger hint of orange blossom could mean await further instructions, while a sprinkle of crushed pistachio might flag the pastry as safe. Imagine conducting an entire covert conversation through your dessert plate. You lean back against the tavern's wooden wall, absorbing the din of conversation, the flicker of oil lamps, the mingled scents of spices and wine. And you can't help grinning. Because in the world of the Hashashin, even gossip became a weapon, and taverns were the perfect battlefield. So next time you find yourself in a cozy cafe, eavesdropping on the table next to you, just remember, you might be hearing the modern echo of medieval conspiracies whispered over almond pastries and tankards of spiced wine. You slip out of the tavern's warmth into the crisp mountain air, lantern light flickering behind you. The stars wheel above, sharp and cold as silver points on dark velvet. But even under this open sky, secrets stir. Because now, you're stepping into the vibrant chaos of medieval bazaars, where the hum of trade and the clink of coins mask the quieter business of espionage. Tonight, the air thrums with noise. Merchants shout over one another, selling silk dyed in brilliant blues, brass lamps shaped like twisted vines, heaps of cinnamon and saffron piled like miniature dunes. And there, among the riot of color and scent, stand humble pastry stalls. Rows of almond pastries glisten on wicker trays, each spiral and fold hiding more than just a sweet bite. Historians agree that bazaars weren't simply markets. They were centers of information exchange. Deals were struck, alliances formed, and rumors traded faster than any caravan could travel. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin used these bustling markets to orchestrate secret drop-offs hidden behind the guise of ordinary commerce. Some say the risk of public exposure was too great. Others insist that hiding in plain sight was precisely the Hashashin's strength. You watch as a merchant in a plum-colored turban haggles with a buyer over the price of almond pastries. His voice carries above the din. "Made with the purest almonds from Samarkand." But his eyes keep darting toward a nearby cloth stall, where a man stands pretending to examine bolts of green silk. Here's the quirky detail that makes your skin tingle. Fringe historians believe merchant guilds were sometimes complicit in the Hashashin's secret operations. Guild members might shelter messengers, pass coated pastries under the counter, or simply look the other way when a suspicious package changed hands. It's espionage wrapped in the polite smile of commerce. One mainstream fact that often slips through the cracks is how deeply trade networks tied the medieval world together. Merchants traveling from Cairo to Damascus to Constantinople carried not only spices and fabrics, but also letters, secret treaties, and personal gossip. A single almond pastry could ride along thousands of miles of trade routes, crossing empires unnoticed, because who'd suspect dessert? Yet historians still argue whether the pastries themselves were the real couriers, or whether they were merely distractions, a decoy to focus prying eyes while the true messages moved by safer channels. Some insist that the entire almond pastry legend grew from a handful of isolated incidents, blown into myth over centuries of storytelling. A nearby pastry vendor calls to you, thrusting a small confection under your nose. It's warm, fragrant, drizzled with honey. "Only a copper piece, traveler," he cries. But then he leans closer and whispers, "2 spirals left means safe. 2 right. Well, maybe keep riding." You blink, momentarily forgetting you're supposed to be blending in. Another merchant snaps open a wooden box, revealing rows of pastries stamped with tiny geometric patterns. He taps one with his finger. "This one's just sweet. That one carries news from Alamut." You try not to gape. Because whether true or merely market theatrics, the mere idea that desserts hold secrets keeps everyone guessing and nervous. Here's another fringe claim that adds spice to the story. Some believe that entire market stalls were fronts, funded by the Hashashin to gather intelligence. A spice merchant might appear to sell cloves and cinnamon, but behind the stall's curtains, coded messages were being deciphered, pastries swapped, and gold exchanged for secrets. A boy rushes past you carrying a tray stacked high with almond crescents. He weaves between camels, veiled women, and shouting traders, the sweet scent of marzipan trailing behind him like a perfumed flag. And you can't help grinning, because in this world, every almond pastry was both a treat and a test. Was it merely a snack, or a signal that empires might rise or fall by the contents hidden between sugar and almond paste? So next time you're wandering a crowded market and someone offers you a free sample, pause for a second, because in the bazaar of the Hashashin, even a sweet bite might carry a whisper meant to change history. You leave the bustle of the bazaar behind, winding your way down narrow alleys lit only by thin shafts of moonlight. Your cloak brushes the rough brick walls as you emerge onto a dusty road lined with traders loading camels under a blanket of stars. The air is dry, sharp with the smell of animal sweat, dust, and still that faint sweetness of almonds. Because almond pastries were never meant to stay locked away in fortress kitchens. No, they traveled, along caravan routes winding like silk threads across half the known world. Tonight, you're trailing a caravan master with a voice like gravel, who shouts orders in 4 languages. Silk bolts are strapped to camel saddles. Brass lamps swing gently from hooks, and nestled among the bundles are flat wooden boxes that look entirely mundane, but which, as you've learned by now, might contain secrets folded in almond paste. Historians agree that caravan routes were the veins and arteries of medieval empires, carrying goods, news, and sometimes hidden plots. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin used those routes primarily for secret pastry dispatches, or if most of their operations stayed closer to home in Persian fortresses and mountain hideouts. Some scholars insist it was far too risky to send delicate messages over such long distances. Others argue that the caravans were perfect cover for an assassin's quiet reach. The caravan master sees you staring at one of the pastry crates. He barks a laugh. Careful, traveler. Sometimes those sweets are sweeter than they should be. He jerks a thumb toward a young man tending the camels. Last week, he bit into a pastry and claimed he saw visions of stars falling from the sky. Turns out it was just too much rosewater, or so they say. And that's tonight's quirky tidbit. Fringe historians believe some Hashashin pastries may have been laced with mild psychoactive substances, not necessarily to harm the recipient, but to loosen tongues or create confusion if intercepted. Imagine trying to read a secret message while feeling like your sandals are floating 6 inches above the desert floor. You fall into step beside a row of camels, their long lashes flicking dust from their eyes. Each step sounds like muffled drums in the silence. Somewhere further down the line, a mule brays, shaking its load. The smells are overwhelming: spices, animal fur, sweat, and that persistent almond scent wafting from the boxes stacked atop canvas packs. One mainstream fact that rarely gets its due is how food traveled vast distances along these routes. Almonds came from Central Asia, sugar from India, saffron from Persia. A single pastry might contain ingredients that had crossed deserts, mountains, and seas, a tiny edible map of medieval trade. Yet historians still argue whether pastries were simply treats tucked among spices, or whether they genuinely carried crucial intelligence across continents. Some scholars argue that the pastries were too perishable, that parchment might rot, or the almond paste spoil. Others point out that the sheer audacity of hiding messages in food made it the perfect cloak, precisely because no one suspected it. A tall merchant riding alongside you pulls a pastry from his saddlebag and offers it your way. "Taste?" he asks. "From Alamut itself." But he winks and mutters, "Or maybe from the spice merchants trying to pretend they're assassins. Hard to know these days." Another man nearby, dark eyes glinting, opens a box of pastries, each stamped with delicate symbols. "This one went to Aleppo, that one to Cairo. All safe so far." He taps one crescent-shaped piece with a gnarled finger. "But that one, I'd leave it alone. Too many questions attached." Here's another fringe curiosity for you. Some whisper that Hashashin couriers deliberately left certain pastries to be captured by enemy forces. The messages inside were false, designed to mislead rival spies. Imagine going through all that effort, baking secret codes, only to send your enemies chasing shadows across the desert. As the caravan starts rolling forward again, bells tinkling softly, you fall in line beside the camels, the stars stretching endless above. You can't help smiling at the thought that beneath every layer of almond paste might lie secrets powerful enough to topple a sultan, or send him on a wild goose chase through the dunes. So next time you see a delicate pastry perched beside your coffee cup, remember, that sweet treat once traveled with silk and gold across vast deserts, and it might have carried more secrets than any scroll tucked into a leather pouch. You follow the caravan until dawn begins staining the horizon with pale orange streaks. then slip away into the rocky passes winding back toward Alamut. As the fortress walls come into view once more, you duck through a side entrance and find yourself in a chamber quieter than any you've seen yet. Here, the air feels charged, as though even the dust motes swirling in a shaft of sunlight carry secrets. Because in this hidden workshop, the Hashashin worked with one of their most delicate tools of espionage, paper thin as pastry layers. Tonight, you watch as a young scribe leans over a low table, his reed pen scratching faintly across a sheet so translucent you'd swear it might tear from a single breath. Historians agree that medieval artisans in Persia and the Islamic world were masters of paper-making, producing sheets so fine they felt like silk beneath your fingertips. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin possessed paper thin enough and durable enough to survive being folded inside almond pastries for days of perilous travel. The scribe holds up a completed sheet, and light pours through it like sun through lace. He glances over and says, "One drop of ink too much, and the paper disintegrates." You wince, imagining a critical message dissolving into sticky almond paste mid-journey. Here's the quirky detail that makes this moment irresistible. Fringe historians claim that some of the Hashashin's secret papers were treated with special solutions, like egg white, starch, or gum arabic, to strengthen them just enough to withstand heat, moisture, and even a bit of handling. So even if the pastry melted a little in the sun, the words might still be legible. It's medieval food science meets spycraft. Nearby, another artisan works over a stone slab, gently pounding almond paste into a broad, thin sheet. He then lifts a whisper-thin paper strip and lays it onto the almond paste. Another layer of sweet paste covers the message, pressed so carefully that no trace shows on the pastry's surface. It's delicate work. One slip, and ink might bleed through, revealing secrets no one was supposed to see. One mainstream fact that's easily overlooked. While parchment was the traditional medium for official documents, paper had begun spreading rapidly through the Islamic world by the 11th and 12th centuries. It was cheaper, lighter, and far more versatile for the clandestine business of the Hashashin. Yet historians still argue whether messages truly survived the rigors of long travel inside pastries. Some scholars insist that even the finest paper would dissolve after a day in desert heat. Others believe the almond paste itself acted as a protective barrier, keeping the paper cool and safe until it reached its destination. The scribe flicks excess ink from his pen and murmurs, "We choose paper for what it can hide, and how little it weighs." And you suddenly realize that every ounce mattered on those long caravan routes. Even a few extra grams of paper could slow a messenger, or betray that he carried more than just sweets. Here's another fringe tidbit that might leave you blinking. Some claim that the Hashashin experimented with edible paper. Early versions were supposedly made from rice starch and gum, dissolving harmlessly if swallowed in a pinch. Imagine being caught by the Sultan's guards, chewing frantically to destroy state secrets before anyone could pry them from your almond pastry. A grizzled cook slides a finished pastry toward you. He taps it lightly and says, "Thin enough to vanish, thick enough to carry an empire's fate." You lift the pastry, feeling its surprising weight despite its delicate look, and wonder what secrets might be folded inside. And that's the genius of it. In the world of the Hashashin, even something as fragile as a sheet of paper could hold the power to reshape kingdoms. provided it was thin enough to hide between layers of sugar and almonds. So the next time you hold a delicate slip of paper in your hands, marvel for a moment, because centuries ago it might have been tucked into a pastry, carrying whispers of conspiracy across deserts, mountains, and empires. You slip the delicate pastry back onto the table, fingertips tingling from the weight of secrets it might carry, and turn down another passage lit by flickering oil lamps. The stones under your sandals are cool and slightly damp, whispering echoes of 1,000 hidden conversations. Because now you're about to witness a moment when sweet treats met palace intrigues in the grand courts of sultans and emirs. Tonight, you're stepping into the world where sultans, spies, and sweet gifts collided, with almond pastries right at the heart of the game. You arrive at a vaulted chamber alive with color and sound. Rich carpets sprawl across the marble floors. Courtiers in silks of emerald and gold cluster around a dais where a sultan reclines, his eyes half-lidded as musicians strum gentle tunes. At his elbow sits a towering silver platter piled with confections, almond pastries glistening under the flickering lamplight. Historians agree that diplomatic gifts were a crucial part of medieval politics. A tray of sweets, a bolt of silk, a jeweled dagger, each was more than a present. It was a signal of loyalty, friendship, or hidden threats. But historians still argue whether the Hashashin truly sent pastries to sultans as covert warnings or as Trojan horses carrying secret messages. Some scholars dismiss it as pure legend, while others insist those trays of sweets were as dangerous as any blade. A servant steps forward, offering the sultan a delicate almond crescent. He lifts it slowly, the pastry catching the light, and you half expect him to sniff it for resin or hidden paper. Instead, he takes a careful bite. Around the chamber, conversations stall, eyes flicking toward the dais as if waiting for the sultan to drop dead mid-chew. Here's the quirky tidbit for tonight. Fringe historians whisper that certain Hashashin pastries might have been deliberately crafted as warnings rather than weapons. A single pastry, left untouched but conspicuously delivered, could serve as a silent threat. "We could reach you," it said, without spilling a single drop of blood. One mainstream fact often overlooked is how deeply food and diplomacy intertwined in medieval courts. To refuse a gift was a grave insult, but to accept it, especially from a group like the Hashashin, meant weighing whether the sweet treat might carry a hidden dagger in its layers of almond paste. Yet historians still argue whether any sultans actually received death threats baked into pastries. Some records suggest high-ranking emirs received gifts from Alamut that caused immediate panic in court. Others claim the stories are later inventions by chroniclers keen to amplify the Hashashin's aura of mystery and fear. As the sultan sets his half-eaten pastry down, a hush ripples through the chamber. His eyes scan the courtiers, as though silently daring anyone to make a move. A vizier leans in and mutters, "Perhaps, my lord, we should have it tested." The sultan waves him off, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Life is sweeter when spiced with danger," he says, licking a dusting of sugar from his fingers. You try not to snort at the mix of bravado and pure culinary drama. Here's another fringe rumor that's pure medieval soap opera. It's said that a certain pastry, delivered to a sultan's court, once hid not a message but a map, showing hidden passes through the mountains straight to Alamut. The sultan was so terrified he forbade almond pastries from his palace forever. True or not, it's the kind of story that makes you look at your dessert plate with fresh suspicion. A cook in the shadows slides another tray closer to the dais. The pastries are shaped into tiny pyramids, glazed with honey and studded with slivers of pistachio. He leans toward you and whispers, "A message inside each one, but only for the right eyes." And you realize that in this glittering court, almond pastries are more than just dessert. They're currency, weapon, and silent messenger all rolled into one. So next time you're served a sweet treat by someone smiling just a little too broadly, remember, in the courts of the Hashashin's day, even a humble pastry might carry whispers capable of toppling empires or ending the evening with one very poisoned bite. You slip away from the echoes of palace intrigue, your mind buzzing with images of sultans eyeing pastries like potential grenades. The fortress corridors feel cooler as you follow another narrow stairway spiraling upward, each step worn smooth under centuries of feet. Higher and higher you climb, until the stair opens onto a vast stone terrace high above the valley floor. Tonight, you're standing in the mountain eyries of Alamut, where the air is crisp and sharp enough to slice. Wind howls past the towers, ruffling your cloak as you peer down into the darkness below. Because here, perched above the world, the Hashashin perfected their secret kitchens, the very places where almond pastries transformed from sweet indulgence into weapons of espionage. Historians agree that Alamut's height was both fortress and symbol, a realm apart, visible yet nearly unreachable. But historians still argue how much of the fortress was dedicated to kitchens versus military training. Some say the legendary secret kitchens were as vital as the armories, producing both physical sustenance and coded confections. Others insist the stories are romantic exaggerations woven by later chroniclers. You slip inside a stone chamber half open to the mountain air, where cooks bustle around massive clay ovens. The flames roar and hiss as copper pots bubble with syrup, and the scent of caramelizing sugar floats into the night sky. Here's the quirky tidbit that makes your heart race. Fringe historians believe that certain fortress chefs might have held dual roles as encryption masters. Imagine a chef ladling honey one moment, then scribbling complex codes the next. And perhaps most delightfully absurd, some even whisper that cooking recipes themselves doubled as ciphers, a list of ingredients becoming a secret message if read a certain way. 2 handfuls almonds, 1 spoon vinegar, might secretly translate to troop numbers or assassination orders. One mainstream fact many overlook is how much knowledge flourished inside Alamut beyond military arts. The fortress housed libraries, astronomers, philosophers, and craftsmen. It was a place where ideas and conspiracies thrived, protected by stone walls and sheer cliffs. Yet historians still argue whether any original Hashashin pastry recipes have survived into modern times. Some claim that certain regional sweets in Iran or Syria today bear echoes of the fortress's culinary traditions, while others believe the true recipes, and their secrets, were lost forever when the Mongols razed Alamut. A stocky cook ladles thick almond paste into a massive wooden trough, his biceps flexing with each stir. He grins at you and calls out, "We don't just bake pastries, we bake power." He gestures around the room as if to say, "This is where empires begin and end." Another chef nearby hums a low tune as he carefully presses paper-thin sheets into almond layers. He glances over and murmurs, Inks dry faster up here in the mountain air." It's an offhand comment, but it hits you just how practical the fortress's height was. Not just for defense, but for delicate operations like drying fragile messages or preventing mold from ruining parchment. Here's another fringe angle to tickle your imagination. Some claim that the fortress kitchens developed unique pastry shapes found nowhere else. Crescent spirals, triple-layer knots, and almond cones, allegedly unique to Alamut. To insiders, each shape might convey which faction the pastry came from, or signal loyalty to a particular commander, like edible military insignia. A blast of wind surges through the open archways, rattling brass utensils hanging on hooks. Sparks leap from the ovens, swirling like fireflies into the blackness. And you realize that up here, the Hashashin weren't merely hiding. They were crafting an entire ecosystem of espionage, where sweets and secrets blended into one irresistible lure. So next time you're standing on a hilltop, wind in your hair, imagining yourself as a solitary figure gazing over vast kingdoms, remember, in the mountain eyries of Alamut, even almond pastries were shaped by altitude, secrecy, and the thin, cold air of a place built for watching and waiting. You step back from the roaring ovens, blinking sparks from your eyes, and slip down spiraling stairs into the deeper heart of Alamut. The fortress seems quieter now, shadows stretching longer across the stone floors. There's a hush, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. Because you're nearing the end of this story, a story that, like the almond pastries themselves, crumbles at the edges under the weight of time. Tonight, you find yourself in a vault-like chamber, stacked with wooden chests bound in iron. Dust coats the lids, motes floating in the torchlight like golden snow. A lone scholar, robes faded and patched, kneels before one chest, gently sorting through brittle scrolls and scraps of parchment. He looks up at you, eyes weary yet gleaming with the fierce spark of someone who spent a lifetime chasing secrets. Historians agree that the Mongol conquest of Persia shattered Alamut's power in the mid-13th century. The fortress was burned, libraries scattered, and many of the Hashashin's records lost forever. But historians still argue whether any genuine pastry recipes, or the precise techniques of message-carrying sweets, survived that devastation. Some insist scraps of knowledge slipped away with fleeing survivors. Others believe the secrets were extinguished in the flames, never to be reborn. The scholar holds up a tiny scrap of parchment stained with old grease spots. Barely legible, it reads something like, "Fold the paste thin, layer sweet, hide words well." He sighs. It's not much, but it hints there once was more. Here's the quirky tidbit for tonight. Some fringe historians believe that modern sweets in Iran, Syria, and parts of Turkey may be distant echoes of the Hashashin's coded pastries. Certain almond confections, particularly those shaped in coils or knotted braids, might carry a legacy stretching back to Alamut's kitchens, though no one can prove it conclusively. One mainstream fact worth remembering is that culinary traditions are astonishing survivors. Recipes morph and evolve, yet traces of old techniques and flavors often endure in unexpected places. Even if the Hashashin's precise methods vanished, the idea of hiding messages in food still captivates spies and storytellers alike. Yet historians still argue whether the almond pastry tales are mostly romantic embellishments. Some scholars suggest chroniclers invented them to enhance the Hashashin's sinister mystique, transforming a fearsome assassin network into culinary legends. Others counter that the method was so brilliant and so perfect for smuggling delicate secrets that it simply makes sense. The scholar tucks the greasy scrap back into a velvet pouch, eyes flicking toward you. "If there's one truth," he murmurs, "it's this. The Hashashin mastered fear, and fear leaves echoes." He snaps shut the chest, dust billowing into the torchlight. You stand for a long moment, staring at the iron locks, imagining how many secrets might lie hidden in recipes lost to time. So the next time you savor an almond pastry, its layers delicate as silk, sweet as forgotten promises, pause and wonder, what secrets once nestled in such simple delights? And might some hidden code still survive, waiting for the right person to take a bite and finally read the message inside? And so, my friend, here we are at the quiet edge of our journey, high in the mountains of Alamut and deep in the folds of almond pastry layers. The torches flicker lower now, the fortress corridors lying silent and still as the hush before dawn. Your footsteps slow, softer on the stones, and you feel the cool breath of wind sweeping through these ancient halls. The distant stars spin overhead, ageless sentinels keeping watch over secrets whispered long ago. You can almost taste the lingering sweetness of almonds, the faintest trace of rosewater still drifting through the air. The cooks have banked their fires, the scribes have rolled up their fragile papers, and even the ever-watchful couriers have slipped into shadowy alcoves to rest. Whatever messages were hidden inside those delicate pastries have long since crumbled into dust, or perhaps lie waiting somewhere, folded between sugar and secrets, for another curious soul to discover. Historians may never fully agree whether the Hashashin truly wove an empire of espionage into almond paste, or whether the legend grew with each retelling. But that's the magic of history, isn't it? The way a single whisper, a scrap of parchment, or the scent of a pastry can ripple across centuries, leaving questions sweeter and sometimes darker than any simple truth. So let your thoughts drift, soft as powdered sugar falling over warm pastries. Let the mysteries of hidden messages and mountain fortresses dissolve gently in the dark like honey on your tongue. Thanks for joining me on this winding journey tonight. May your dreams be light, your secrets safe, and your pastries never poisoned.